Hi guys, welcome to another After Effects tutorial. Today we're going to be going over the basics of animation. So this will be useful when creating things like infographics, such as this one. So as you can see, it's just a graph showing elevation over distance, but what makes it interesting is the way it comes into the screen. So there's lots of different moving elements that make up this one graph, and I'll just show you a little bit more about that. I'll just quickly show you what that project file looks like. As you can see, it's quite a busy timeline. For those of you that know After Effects already, you'll recognize these are pre-compositions. And if I was to double click on them, it would take us to them, inside them, and you can just see this is where the individual animations are made. So each element, such as the arrow for example, are animated individually, just to simplify things and break things down, and then they're all brought together in one composition, which is the master composition, this one here, and this is the one that I export. So today's tutorial won't be creating something quite as complex as that, but what it will do is teach you the fundamentals so that you can take these principles that you're going to learn today and create something as complex or as simplistic as you like. So let's get started. So first of all, we're going to make a new composition. We're going to make it 1920 by 1080, which is full HD, 25 frames per second, and duration of the composition will be 10 seconds. I'll just name it master. And so we've now loaded it up here. I'm going to create a bar graph. So it's going to be really simple. We're just going to have a vertical line here, and we're going to animate in a horizontal line that extends out here, and then we're going to have some bars load up. And yeah, so first of all, new layer, solid. All of the bars are going to be made out of, and lines are going to be made out of solid. So we're going to call this one vertical line. Cool. We're going to make it, let's go 2 pixels wide, maybe 3 pixels wide, and maybe 900 in height. So that's what we're left with. And now if I hit P on the keyboard for position, or I could use the drop down menu and go to position and drag it along like that. I'm now going to, instead of create a new solid for the bottom, I'm just going to make a duplicate of this. So holding, whilst this layer is selected, hold down Command, hit D on the keyboard. We've got a second one. I'm going to hit Enter and rename it. So with that layer selected, hit Enter. Horizontal line. Now, let's just rotate it. So R on the keyboard, 90 degrees, hit Enter. And now P on the keyboard for position. And I'm just going to move it down here. But I just want it to be a bit longer, so I'm going to hit S on the keyboard for scale. Again, I can access all of these by using the drop-down menu, and I'm going to uncheck this. So it scales like that. Make it a bit longer, just a touch. I'm not going to be too precise or too much of a perfectionist with this. This is just to teach you the principles. So let's just say they meet perfectly. Now let's begin with animating them. How I would go about that. As you can see, if I was to change the scale of them at the moment, they're scaling around the center. And that's because of this little icon here, which is the anchor point. Wherever the anchor point is, that's where they're going to scale from. So if I move the anchor point, you'll see that the line moves, but the anchor point stays in the same place. But that's okay, we're just going to move it over here so the anchor point is on the end. And now you see when I affect the scale, it doesn't scale the object from the middle, it scales it from where the anchor point is, which is perfect. That's just what we want. So I'm going to now use position to move the whole object as well as the anchor point back to right where we want it. And I'm going to do the same for the vertical line, because if I hit S for scale, uncheck this, because if I don't uncheck that, it will scale the width as well. We just want to scale the height, which is this one. So as you can see, it's scaling around the anchor point, which is not what we want. We want it to scale from here, so it grows up from this point, this corner. So A for anchor point, and we're just going to move that down there. Now P on the keyboard, position, move the position of the entire graph down here, and that's good. We're all set. We're ready to animate the scale. So if I zoom in on my timeline here a little, actually I'm just going to extend both these layers to last the full duration of 10 seconds. Zoom in a bit so I can see the frames. So I'm going to keyframe the scale for both. So I'm going to hit the stopwatch. So that means that After Effects is recording the scale at this point in the timeline where this keyframe is. So at this point, I want the scale to be really quite small. And then let's say 6 keyframes in. So I'll scale it up. I want it to be here, a bit too long, and then 2 keyframes after, I'm going to have it just right. So what this does is if I scrub through, it's going to extend out and then pop back. So it looks like that. Now I'm going to do the same for the vertical line. S on the keyboard for scale. Go back to the beginning of the clip. Hit the stopwatch. Let's make this line really small. Now at this point, I'm going to match it up with my horizontal line. I'm going to make it too long. And then I'm going to go forward 2 frames. And then we'll end it here so it's just right. So you can see they both kind of expand out and then squash back in again. So now that's done, let's start introducing the bars that will then spring up to give us our data. So let's go layer, new, solid. Let's go width, I don't know, 80 will do. Height, let's go 700. And I'm just going to change the color of this to kind of red. Perfect. Now let's hit P on the keyboard. Let's affect the position. Now we can be as creative as we like, but I'm going to choose to have this bar come in by extending, growing from the bottom. Again, the way I'm going to do that is using the scale of the height. So if I hit S on the keyboard and create a keyframe here, and I set the scale to 0, what it's going to do is scale around the bottom again. So we have the same issue again. So what we need to do is move this anchor point, this square, circular like target object to the bottom. So if I hit A on the keyboard, move the anchor point to the bottom of the bar, hit P to reposition it where I want it. At the moment it's overlapping the white bar, so I want it to be below that. So I'm going to move it below that on the layers. So you can see now the white line is above it. So let's go back to our scale. Now let's scale it down. Perfect, it's scaling just how we want it. Let's go forward a few frames, scale it up too high, and then forward a couple frames, and then that's where we want it. The reason why I go too high is the Disney animation principle of squash and stretch. So it just kind of gives more life. If it was just to extend straight up and then just go straight there, it's kind of boring to watch. Whereas this gives it a bit more, I don't know, a bit more character. You can see it comes in too early here. We don't want it to be visible until the bars have fully loaded. So I'm just going to trim the end just by clicking and dragging the clip. So it's not visible until here. Cool. Great. So now for all the others, I'm just going to duplicate this. So Command and D. And I'm going to hit P on the keyboard and just move it along. And I'll repeat that. Command and D. P on the keyboard for position. Move it along. Command D. Cool. So now we have this animation where they all load up, but obviously they're all the same, and that's not very interesting statistics if everything is the same. So let's just select all and hit S to bring up the scale option on all of them at once. And now we can go to here, the final point where they animate down into their final position. And I'm just going to randomize this a little bit. So just going to randomize them all and just go through them and just change this. There we go. So now what we're left with is that they all kind of spring up and then go down to there. But what would be more interesting is if they staggered, so they came in this one, then this one, then this one. So to do that, we're just gonna, well, again, maybe they could all come in at random times. So I'm just gonna be really random with the timing of how they come in. So if we play it from the beginning, but now they all disappear, and that's because we need to extend the clip duration for each one. So let's just, I'm going to be really lazy, select them all using Shift and just extend it like that. One last tip I'll leave you with is to add motion blur. So as they're moving, when you film something normally, there should be motion blur. So let's just press on this tab to enable motion blur throughout the scene, but then we need to check this box under the motion blur tab for each individual item. So I'm going to just, using Shift, holding down Shift, select all of the items in the composition and press this tab under motion blur. And as you can see, it's a huge difference. So it's without, and then that's with motion blur, and it just makes things look a lot smoother. There you have it.